Good morning, witches. Tiffany here on Bewitching.Bemused. Today we're going to talk about finalizing your spells and different reasons that you might use different techniques, whether that is burning your ingredients at the end, burying them, hiding them away, and a couple of other pretty common ones. Now, of course, I'm talking about consumable things like a photograph, a petition, some thread or yarn, ashes, rose petals, herbs, candle wax, things like that. I'm not talking about crystals that you might want to cleanse later and kind of neutralize their energy and then reuse them at a later point in time. Not necessarily talking about that. Sometimes you either wrote the spell yourself or the book or, place that you're getting the spell from doesn't quite tell you what to do with it. It just says, do the spell, recite this incantation, visualize, and it's done. And then you're kind of left there with these items that you're not really going to use again. So what do you do with them? Do they just sort of sit there for a while? It feels a little anticlimactic to just sort of sweep it all up and toss it. I mean, sure, you might want to reuse them, or sometimes in certain cases, you might just put them into a little baggie and carry that with you to carry around the energy of your spell, but always there's tons of different circumstances. It really depends on what spell you're doing, why you're doing it, your intention, how you're performing it, what the ingredients are. I'm trying to keep this as simplified as possible for you. But yes, like I said, it feels a little anticlimactic to just be like, oh, okay, now I'm done and it's just gonna sit there. I also strongly believe that if you are following a pre-written spell, that is a spell that somebody else created that you did not come up with on your own, you should always know why it is that you're doing a specific action, why it is that you're using a specific ingredient. I'm very much about that. The importance of understanding how this action, behavior, ingredient ties in with symbolizing your intention manifesting, right? So if somebody tells you to bury something, how does that work? How does that make sense with your intention? So today, I just want to go over these things to help you write your own spells, to help you know how to finish your own spells with a really, really good finalizing period or exclamation mark, and also to understand your pre-written spells. And of course, as always, if you're using a pre-written spell and it tells you to do one thing, I'm always a big supporter of changing that and using what you think works best for your situation or makes the most sense to you. Now, this is not a total list. I'm just going to be covering some of the most popular ways to end, kind of punctuate your spell, some of which would be burying your ingredients at the end, burning them, releasing them into the wind or into moving natural water sources, hiding them away, and of course throwing them away, like making sure you're getting them away from you as quickly as possible through the trash or flushing them down the toilet. So those are the ones we're going to cover. There's lots more, so just be aware that this is not a complete and definitive list. And even with these individual methods, they're not, again, a comprehensive list of every single thing it could possibly represent. It's just some of the main ones, and it may not all speak to you. That's perfectly fine. And some things may just not make sense within the context of your particular practice. You'll also find that a lot of these can, at times, be symbolic of two completely contrasting ideas or intentions. I would just really encourage you to not get hung up on all of the fine little details on every single thing that's listed in there. That's perfectly okay. You're just going to want to use this as sort of a guideline, and then at the end of the day, follow your own gut instincts. Your intuition is really it's really the best way to guide yourself in writing any spell, finalizing any spell, altering any spell for your own needs. So just use this as guidelines, as something to kind of learn from, a springboard, if you will, and then trust yourself from there. Finally, none of this is tradition specific. If you do follow a particular path or tradition and you aren't sure if you do have tradition specific endings for spells, you might want to reach out to a mentor or do a little research on your particular tradition, because that is the case in certain practices. Also, if you are working with a particular spirit, entity, deity, ancestor, so on and so forth, they might have a particular kind of structure to spell work and working with them. So again, This isn't anything specific. This is more eclectic in what I'm describing, so maybe just do a little research into that as well. Let's start with burning. A common thread throughout all of these methods, and in fact throughout all of spell work in general, is that the intention behind your action is the most important thing. So when we look at burning something, you could consider this either, again, we're gonna touch on these contrasting ideas. It's either destroying something, you're banishing it, you're getting rid of it, right? Or it could be you're lighting it up. You're bringing it to life, you are lighting the way. So it could be sort of a, I don't want to use the terms positive or negative, but it could be a creation or it could be a destruction. Fire can cleanse. It can also symbolize the warmth of love, of family, of home, or the solidifying fire of the forge. So with all of these, this list of examples, it could go on and on and on. So you just need to use your instincts, like I said, and take a moment and think about what this action of setting ablaze, allowing to burn means to you within the context of your emotions that you are putting into the spell, in the context of your spell's intention, and in the context of the rest of the actions leading up to the end of your spell. Other things to consider is that fire requires fuel to burn. The act of burning itself takes your ingredients, right? These symbols for your intention, for what you are trying to accomplish with your spell, and converts them into an energy source. Now, symbolically, this could also be viewed from the perspective that they are actively being consumed. Also consider that while a flame can catch quick, it can also burn through quickly as well. We'll touch on this again when we get to burying, but some practitioners view this as burning is really good symbolically for something that you want quick, but it doesn't need to last long. When you're thinking about what this means to you, the act of burning, you should also factor in things like smoke as well, the smoke aspect of it. For many, it's nothing. It's just a cast off. It's a shadow of what you are burning. And for other people, the smoke is something that is actually carrying your intention upward, outward to the universe, to spirit, to its intended destination. If you work specifically with elemental magic, fire is often used for creativity, passion, desire and love, transformation, inner strength, willpower, purification, and courage. Now, just purely from a practical standpoint, fire and burning may not always be the best choice for you. You might have ingredients that aren't gonna burn, they're too big, or they're solid, you wanna get rid of them with the rest of your ingredients, but they won't burn, right? You also have things that might be toxic to burn, or you might just be in a situation where you don't have a place to safely burn, or maybe you can't be around smoke. That's okay. You just need to factor those things in, and that the practical side of it, it's okay if the practical side of it rules out a method. You just have to then consider what's the next best alternative. The final thing to consider when it comes to burning your ingredients is, what do you do with the ashes? And part of this is to question, are the ashes still a part of the spell ingredients, or are they now just the leftovers? You know, they kind of are, the ingredients have been transformed, the energy's been released, and these ashes are just kind of what's left over. You can just kind of sweep them up and toss them in the trash. Or do they still hold intention and energy and meaning? I personally find that in most cases, by that point, they are completely depleted of energy, and it is just sort of the cast off, right? But you might disagree. It might also just depend on the spell, because I do have some spells where the ashes are used afterward. So a couple of things that you could do with those, throw them away if you feel like they're not needed. You can also add them to your jar of ritual ash. I always keep a jar of ritual ash for incense that I've burned, things like that. It is in itself an ingredient. It just kind of takes on a different form and a different energy. Or if you feel that it is still an active part of the spell, of your ritual, then you should decide what you want to do. Again, now you could bury them, you could keep them in a little pouch, you could anoint a candle later on with them, you could disperse them in wind or water. It's, again, we'll get to all of that. It is just another factor that you'll want to think on. Next is burying. So what are some things that we bury? Well, caskets, but also seeds. This is the really cool thing about burying your ingredients and thinking on what burial symbolizes, because it can symbolize death or birth. And then, of course, there are a multitude of variations that sit in between those two extremes that burial also represents. So birth or rebirth, growth, renewal, manifestation, yet also decay, decomposition. Decomposition for the sake of creating new growth. Release, secrecy, solitude, grounding, of course, that's a big one, grounding. And finally, for burial, liminal space. I say finally, but there's more than that. Again, not a comprehensive list. The good thing about some items being buried, so for instance, a jar or a railroad spike, is that they won't break down over time, right? So they can continue to absorb energy into them from the earth to continue being charged up and to continue working. Barring an earthquake or a landslide, they will stay pretty much right where you put them. So again, kind of looking at the practical side of how to end a spell, this might make burial an optimal choice for something like a home ward. So some sort of protective barrier that you're putting up. Maybe all of your ingredients for that spell are going into a jar, and then you can bury that in your front yard right by your door. Maybe you have items that you've charged up in your spell, and now you're going to put them in the four corners or the compass points around the perimeter of your home. Additionally, I did mention this earlier in the burning section just like a couple minutes ago, but while with burying, it's not quite as quick as setting something aflame, right? But while you have to wait a little longer for results, in the viewpoint of certain practitioners, those results will be longer lasting and they will continue to compound on one another. So consider you bury a seed, you don't expect to suddenly see a fully formed tree the very next day, right? So it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, you just have to wait. But once it does start to sprout, it will continue to grow upon itself. So it'll start as a little seedling, just a little sprout, little green guy popping up, and then it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you have a tree, or you have a sapling, and then you have a tree, and then eventually you have a tree that's bearing fruit, right? Another reason you may want to choose to bury is if you are using all natural ingredients. Some people feel that if you are using something that was taken from the earth, at the end of it all, to dispose of those things, you should return it to the earth. If you work with elemental magic, earth is often good for stability, natural instincts or intuition, prosperity, fertility, wisdom, introspection, security, and dependability. Finishing this off with the practical side of things, if you really want to bury something, but it's not something that you feel comfortable burying in your yard or in out in the going to a park and burying it there, or into the forest, a natural setting, for whatever reason, you can always just take a plant pot, fill that with soil, and bury your ingredients in there. You may not want to use burial if you are working with ingredients that carry a scent that might attract pests, vermin, or even just dangerous wild animals. I mean, unless that's the intention of your spell. Also consider that you may not want to bury something that, should you forget where it's buried, or you just kind of forget that you buried it all together, that you would feel uncomfortable with a beloved pet or a child, you know, playing out in the yard and digging up later on. And I always encourage you guys, if you are burying outside, to mostly use biodegradable and natural ingredients, unless you intend for the burial to be only for a specific period of time and you're gonna dig it up afterward. I'm just a really big advocate for not littering with your spell work. But if you're burying inside of a plant pot, you can put whatever the hell you want in there. Next is wind dispersal. If you are working with light ingredients, so feathers, ashes, petals, herbs, that sort of thing, you can just wait until the wind picks up and then release them. With this one, we can consider wind being used in a wind instrument, or, you know, moving wind chimes to create music. You can consider wind pushing into a boat's sails to carry it forward, or carrying pollen on the breeze. Wind can facilitate movement and travel, and when you release ingredients into the wind or on a breeze, that wind can carry those ingredients really far and wide and in a sometimes unpredictable direction. Symbolically, consider, the breath of life, as well as the wind that sweeps up seeds and carries them off to go grow in new locations. Air movement is also intrinsically tied to weather patterns. If you work with the natural elements, air is used for intelligence and intellect, logic, communication, travel, freedom, harmony, imagination, and dreams. Another similar one is water dispersal, so releasing your ingredients in a moving stream, river, the ocean, just a naturally occurring and naturally moving body of water. Now, you could whittle it down and get even more specific with what does a river symbolize versus a waterfall versus the ocean, fresh water versus salt water. And I do encourage you to consider those things. There's also, of course, the practicality. You might live in an area that's surrounded by rivers, but you're also landlocked. You've got no ocean in sight. That's okay. Just if you do have the variety available to you, then yeah, I would encourage you to get really specific with what it symbolizes for you and for your action. But otherwise, just don't allow yourself and your spell to be limited just because, okay, yeah, ocean would be better than stream, but you live in, I don't know, Nebraska. Water is yet another mode of transportation and movement. It can carry a message, or it can encourage smooth or faster movement, travel, or communication. It's cleansing, it's clarifying, we need it to survive, yet it can also sink ships and drown swimmers. All life on Earth needs it for nourishment and survival, and yet water can also wear away at the toughest surfaces. Over time, running water can create an entire freaking canyon. Or if you look at hagstones, stones sitting in caves where water is just dripping and dripping and dripping at the same spot can wear a hole straight through the stone. Now, although using moving natural water to end a spell is going to be water in its liquid form, of course, you can also factor in that water adapts to its surroundings, to its environment, and of course, to its temperature. So yes, it's very flexible and fluid in its movement in general, but you also have two other forms that it takes in ice and steam. And even if it's not actively in one of those forms when you're releasing your ingredients into its liquid form, I think it still holds that sort of, that essence of adaptability. If you work with natural elements, water is used for healing, understanding, emotional release, flexibility, spirit communication, cleansing, and change. That kind of covers all of the elements for the most part. Again, I'm leaving some things out, but there are two more things that you can do at the end of your spell with your ingredients that are pretty popular that I want to touch on. One of those is throwing your ingredients away. Now, I don't mean that you go, okay, I'm done with this. Like, I used the ingredients, I did the spell, I did the ritual. I don't have any use for these anymore and I'm not going to reuse them. I'll just toss them. Not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, and this is very, very common when it comes to baneful magic and things like banishings and cleansing, is you want to get those ingredients away from you as quickly as possible. So you either flush them down the toilet or you throw them in the trash. You just try to get them out of your house and away from your person. This is often more practical than symbolic when it comes to baneful magic. It's because these items are now imbued with the negative energy of what you've just cast, and you don't want to leave them hanging around your person or your space or, your loved ones in your home, your pets, that sort of thing. But so also it can work symbolically, like for a cleansing, for instance. There could be some absorption, yes, but there's also that symbolism with cleansing or banishing, I should say, where you're trying to get rid of this, right? You're trying to get rid of the negative energy, or you are banishing a person or a behavior or a what have you, right? And so symbolically, you're getting rid of it. Also, if you're working baneful magic towards a very specific person, I would say there is a sort of petty eloquence to flushing those down the toilet. In my opinion, you're sort of implying that that person is as low as the other things that you tend to flush down the toilet on a regular basis. And finally, there is hiding away your ingredients. You'll most commonly see this with sigils and with jars, but of course it can be used for lots of different types of spell ingredients and finalizing your spell. Usually when the intention is to hide it away from yourself so you're not constantly laying eyes on it, whether it's an object or a collection of ingredients, you could bury it in the yard and you know, put a brick over it so you don't lose where it was, or you could put it in the back of a rarely used cupboard. However, hiding away versus getting rid of. So you're getting rid of your ingredients if you're burning them, or if you're throwing them away, or you're dispersing them into the wind. You're getting rid of those. They're not coming back. So hiding away, like I said, when you bury those, you might want to mark the spot because this is often done for a purpose. So when you're hiding versus completely getting rid of, it's usually because it's something that you are working in secret and you need those near a particular target that the spell is for or on, and you need them to continuously to work, or you might have a use for those in the future. A common reason why you might want to hide your ingredients away or your object away versus putting it out on a commonly used shelf is so you can stop dwelling on it and just sitting, you know, every time you lay eyes on it, you're not sitting there going, when will it manifest? When will it manifest? Instead, you've cast the spell, now you've set it and forget it. Why one would want to do that may be dependent upon their particular practice. For instance, in chaos magic, this is a very common technique, is to try to forget about the spell that you cast in order to avoid lusting for results. That's a topic for another time. But also keep in mind that some practitioners disagree with this entirely. They feel like the more that they look at their spell ingredients, their sigil, whatever, the more that they think about it and the more that they focus on it, the more energy that they're adding to that spell that they've already cast. A final note before we wrap this video up, some practitioners do not ever agree with using a method that would destroy the ingredients forever. So they would never burn their ingredients, they would never disperse them into the wind or into running water. They might bury them, but they would either do it in a plant pot or they would do it in their yard and then mark this spot. They would never go out into nature and do so. Now, a reason that one would want to always know where their ingredients are is in the event that they ever want to undo the spell that they cast. Because if you don't have the original ingredients, it can be more difficult to undo what you've done. Not impossible, but a little bit more difficult. Now, if you are curious about methods to reverse or undo spells that you've cast, I've left a link to my video on that down in the description box for you. But that being said, again, it's not impossible to reverse or undo a spell that you've cast if you no longer have the ingredients. It's just a little bit harder. And also, who wants, you know, a month, a year's, a lifetime's worth of ingredients just sitting in their house taking up space? At the end of the day, to each their own. It's just something that you might want to consider with your own practice, and it's also something that you might want to do for some spells, and other ones it's like, meh, whatever. Thank you all for joining me today. If you are interested in that video on how to reverse a spell, you can check it out right here.